Hi, I'm Dr. Jeff Nickel, and this is Gaston. You might have met him before if you've tuned into my Facebook Live events. I have Miss America here as well, our family border collie. But tonight we're talking about cats, and the title of this is Cats Who Hate Each Other's Guts. Oh, God, isn't that rather strong? Well, actually, it's pretty common because people who love cats sometimes feel like if one is good, then a half dozen is even better. And when you crowd them together in the same household, which is nobody's real plan, that can create trouble. But even at our house, when we found little Gaston, he was all of about 10 weeks old or so on the irrigation ditch, and he was just about ready to be coyote snack because it had just rained, and there he was going down into the irrigation ditch to get a drink. And one of my sons and I were walking our dog, Miss America, here along the ditch, and there he was crying, talking to us on the side of the ditch. And so, well, obviously we were going to pick him up, and we took him home, and immediately believed that, well, what we were going to do is find his home. And so we put out a sign, a couple of them, with my private cell phone number. I don't share with anybody. And there weren't any calls for the found white kitten, so we did find his home, and it's ours. That was about 4 years ago. But when he came into our home, we already had Tony. He'll be up on the table here in just a minute. Tony's about 13 now. So when he was about 9 years old, here he was, this middle-aged cat who had been the only cat in our home all of his life since he was a baby. And, you know, when you bring a youngster into the same home with a much older cat, statistically, and I can tell you by my experience in behavior practice, we tend to have problems. So, not in every case, but and the cat fights, if they associate hostility with the first sight of each other, that one event learning that cats are so good at, that can absolutely dominate the relationship for the rest of their lives. And there are people who've had to segregate their cats into different parts of their house so that there was no way they could see each other. Well, gee, let's start off on a good foot. And in fact, I'm going to explain some things about this whole situation to help you sidestep some of these, or maybe help you out if you have this kind of problem. So, I'm Dr. Jeff Nickel, and I want you to know that the purpose of my doing these Facebook Live events, usually on Thursday evenings at 6 o'clock Mountain Time, 8 o'clock Eastern, is I just want people to learn about their pets. I want to spread useful information. So, if you have a question, if anything comes to mind, and it doesn't have to be about cats who are fighting or having a hard time getting along with each other or with their people, it can be about any cat or dog problem, behavioral or physical. I spent many, many years in general practice, and in my behavior practice now, a significant number of these pets have physical problems as well that very often influence their behavior. So I'm still quite up to date on general medicine. And anything comes to mind, you need a little bit of help, you're very welcome to interrupt me, and we'll talk about it for a few minutes. So, questions, anything like that? If you like what you're seeing, hit the wow button or the heart, anything you want to do to participate. I'd like to start out with some of the things that you should not do with cats if they're mixing it up and having a hard time getting along together. One of the most important problems that people say, look, why are we jumping through so many hoops to try to get these cats to get along and, join paws and sing Kumbaya around the fire? Why don't we just let them fight it out, and they'll get it out of their systems, and they'll work it out between them. Please don't ever do that. I'll tell you what, the intensity of the fear that one or very often both cats have towards each other from these just hissing and squalling contests, they really do have one event learning, where going forward, that is the association they have with the other cat. We don't want that. So the last thing we want them to do is have their animosity become even worse. So nobody fights it out. I've often known people, I have an upside down dog here, but I have my white fuzzy Gaston sitting here looking quite handsome. So people often say, well, okay, one of us in the family will hold one cat, and then the other person will bring the cat over and we'll let them sniff noses and just communicate a little bit, and that'll foster a good friendship. Well, that might make sense on a human level, but these are not little people in furry suits. They yes, they bond to us, and they're an essential part of my life, and I know yours too, or you wouldn't be bothering to watch this. But they are a very different species in some very significant ways. And, they've been called socially asocial, which is a broad generalization, but there's value in it because they are certainly capable of social interactions with us and with other cats and with dogs. But you're a silly dog, speaking of silly dogs. But they really don't have a strong requirement for social interactions. They can live without it. And when we hold one cat and bring another one toward it, and they want to escape or avoid the interaction, they really need to be allowed that choice. And when they're being held, they're trapped. And their fear and their defensiveness and their agitation can ramp up. And, well, you can get hurt because they're trying to claw and get away quickly. And I'll tell you, the expression quick as a cat, none of us has reactions that fast. So don't set anybody up to fail by holding these cats and trying to get some kind of a great relationship started. Isn't going to happen. I also see people use spray bottles a lot on cats. They're clawing the furniture, or they're scratching the person, or they're mixing it up together. Please don't do this either. Yes, you can interrupt an event in the moment sometimes if they haven't become highly agitated already. But the trouble with it is that when you add an aversive, something they don't like, it's a punishment. Well, okay, it's a punishment. But when their agitation gets ramped up even higher, at a time when we really want them to walk away and abandon those emotional states, well, if we do this enough times, then at some point, the two cats that we're trying to help associate an even higher level of agitation with being together because this aversive has been added in there that they hate. So don't do stuff they don't hate, or stuff that they do hate. Don't make a bad situation worse. You wouldn't intend to, but that's the upshot of what that kind of stuff happens. I'm going to tell you a brief story because, we don't always handle these situations the same. They're individuals. The families, the environments are different. I had a case, quite memorable. This was a pair of litter mates, a male and a female kitty. They'd known each other since day one. And these folks, excellent people. They adopted them when they were, 8 weeks, I think, as a pair. And frankly, that often goes very well. Cats can, they've always bonded. And if you want two cats and adopting them together, they have a very good chance of doing well together lifelong. But, and of course there's always a but, one of them needed a dental procedure, routine stuff. So they took that cat to the veterinary clinic to spend the day for anesthesia, dental cleaning, that kind of stuff. Cat came home, did just fine. But when it walked in the door, its litter mate was like, "Oh, you get back. You're the devil." Didn't recognize the other cat because immediately the cat who stayed home that day recognized that her brother smelled different. And you would think, well, yeah, but he looks the same, he acts the same, it's just a temporary scent. Can't they get over that? Well, lots of cats do, some of them don't. And so here we had these 3-year-old cats who'd spent every day of their lives indoors together, and we had horrible cat fights. The female cat, the one who stayed home, was chasing her brother, cornering him. They were getting into horrible fights. And the good news is these folks didn't let it go on too long. They got my help before this thing repeated so many times that we couldn't turn it around. And so we started to, number one, we did separate them to different parts of the house. And we very gradually introduced them together, back together, first across a closed door. They knew each other was on the other side. And we had these two folks feed one cat on either side, play, groom, do other low-key pleasurable things, and gradually do that each time a little closer to the door. And when they seemed to do okay, knowing the other cat was close by but not visible, we had them put up a baby gate covered on both sides with a towel, and then we did the same kinds of pleasurable activities, getting a little closer, and then gradually raised the towel so they could see just a little bit of each other's body, but backing way up again, doing this excellent, enjoyable stuff, and then raise it a little higher. And very gradually they could see more of each other, all the while associating very positive events with being with the other cat. Well, gradually they did okay. But the one thing that I asked them right at the outset was, why don't we just let these cats go outside and really spread out and enjoy predatory, natural, feline, wild kitty cat behaviors? Because, they are wild creatures that we keep as pets, and they have some very essential natural wild behaviors. Well, there was an important reason, because where these folks lived, and I ended up making a home visit, is in a great part of Albuquerque in what's called the East Mountain area into Harris Canyon. Well, there's a lot of wildlife, and that's a beautiful thing. That includes predators. Well, they've got coyotes, they have great big hawks and owls, and those cats, we know that they would not last. So these were going to be indoor cats, and that was not a negotiable point. So we worked very long and hard and very patiently and repetitively, and those two kitties did okay. Well, okay, here's another situation. This is a pair of cats, 2 cats out of 3 in the home. They also had a dog, but these were the 2 cats mixing it up, Hubert and Michael. Not their real names. Well, Hubert was the bad actor. This little guy was 3 years old, neutered male, been in the home since he was a kitten, about 12 weeks old. And early on, when they first adopted him, it was pretty clear to me that he'd been weaned from his mother too early, because the first thing he wanted to do was go to Heather, the family dog, and nurse on her, which she was very sweet about it and allowed that to happen. And everybody was happy. And, the family said, oh, this is going to work out great. Well, we want, they said, our cats, to all 3 of them, stay strictly indoors, just because we don't want them leaving the yard and getting lost. No serious issues with predatory risk in that neighborhood. They just wanted to be careful. Well, I'm a buyer of that. I've treated so many catfight abscesses with roaming cats who mix it up with neighbor cats, and cats getting badly injured or worse by neighbor dogs. I know the downside of those decisions, and so I wasn't going to argue. Well, so here's Hubert, who finally, his teeth got big enough that Heather, the sweet dog who had been mothering him, finally said, Hubie, okay, enough's enough. I'm weaning you. So there's Hubert, and he can't suck anymore, and he started getting cranky. And over the ensuing 3 years, this cat got worse and worse, to the point where sometimes he'd be sitting in one part of the house, and if one of the people came, the family members, to touch him or pick him up, he'd take a swing at them and scratch them. But the worst problem was with one of the other 2 cats, this guy named Michael, a very sweet kitty. But if Michael happened to be sitting in Hubert's favorite spot on the windowsill, or if Michael just walked past Hubert just lunge at him and bite him. And for a long time, Michael, the sweet kitty, just tolerated this, and finally got to the point where it scared the heck out of him, and he became defensive. Now, these folks were pretty smart, and they'd already done some research, and they had learned that some people put what's called a catio onto their house. It's a patio for cats. And if you do these things right, they can be really valuable. And it was a screened-in area. It was not as big as would have been ideal, because more is better, bigger is better. Nonetheless, they had this screened catio out there, and they figured this would satisfy Hubert's need to get outside and to experience nature. And so they put some hide boxes out there with it and some climbing perches. I mean, they did a pretty good job. And so Hubert would go out there and he would watch those birds and chatter and slather. I mean, he was serious about being a predator. But it wasn't enough to satisfy that individual cat's needs. Many cats it would be, not Hubert. So he still got a problem with Michael, still jumping all over him, still getting increasingly reactive toward his people when they tried to be affectionate with him. And these folks, unfortunately, people sometimes don't come to a specialist until, they're at their wit's end, like we're the last resort. So they brought him into my exam room, and they said, if we can't solve this problem quickly, we're going to get rid of Hubert. Jesus, I hate that. Pets need to stay where they live, because cats in particular, not only do they get bonded to their family and the other pets in the family, even if they treat them badly, but they're very territorial, and it's a huge stress to move them to another situation where they might do just as bad. These people cared enough about Hubert to actually bring him in and get some help from a veterinary behavior specialist. So I gathered the history, and of course one of the first things we do is a good physical exam and just look for any physical issues that could be a factor. Well, this cat's got skin rippling, like horses do, if you're familiar with in the summertime and the flies keep landing on them and they ripple their skin to get rid of the flies. Well, that wasn't the reason that Hubert had the skin rippling problem. And of course, in many cats who do that, they're itchy kitties. But in his particular case, he was just agitated. I mean, he was living a miserable life because he couldn't do what he naturally needed to do. As a high status, highly predatory cat, he was a fish out of water living inside, even with the catio. So I said, look, what we need to do is consider letting this cat go outside. Well, we're worried about that. And the woman's husband had it was a construction firm, and they had a big yard, but he had this big construction equipment and workers coming and going all the time. And gee, what if Hubert got run over? Well, yeah, those are risks. But you have to weigh risks. This guy's life was miserable, and I explained that it wasn't my decision because he wasn't my kitty, but is it a life well lived to the fullest compared with a life long lived but diminished and truncated? Which direction did they want for Hubert? Well, they decided to let him go ahead and be a cat and do what he needed to do. So I advised them to have an invisible fence installed around the perimeter of the yard. And while that was being done, it took a little while to, so I prescribed gabapentin, which is an extremely safe anti-anxiety medication for cats, especially when they have become overreactive and this explosive type of aggressive behavior. And it's particularly good because you open the capsule and mix it on the food. Most cats just eat it without a problem. So that was our stopgap while they got the invisible fence installed. And when they did, I found little Hubert. He was outside most of the time, but he'd come in the evening after he killed all the rodents that he could find. And they often found him with rodents, and he was a sweetheart. I mean, he was just a wonderful pet, although not in the house much, but he had to do what he had to do. And so one of the other things I suggested to them is something that we've gotten for Gaston here. We have an invisible fence around our 3/4 of an acre here in the semi-rural North Valley of Albuquerque. We added the bells to this collar. But this is a collar, and you can get it in two pieces. If you see, there's a little USB plug on this thing to charge it. And then it's got an interchangeable part here. So when the charge runs down, you simply replace that part and charge the other part. And he wears this thing, and so if the battery runs down in his invisible fence collar, he's wearing this as well. And if we can't find him, we see him on our smartphone. We know exactly where to find him in the neighborhood. Less than ideal. It's a gamble. But we have found that our cats, after we adopted this little guy as a youngster, he and Tony, our other kitty, who has not shown up on the table recently, this little fellow was going after the big guy. He was like 12 weeks old and, picking on this adult cat. And Tony just hated him. What's this young guy doing moving into my house? And it just wasn't the situation that we needed. So we did a lot of work with both of them to introduce them, but a big part of it was to give them both a lot of space to roam and to be cats. There's Tony. Hi, baby. So, and you can see now that there really is no animosity between them. These two guys can live together. They can share snacks. If Tony could speak English, I think he'd say, look, if I had my druthers, this little fuzzy white guy would have never come on the scene. But, everybody's accepted it. So anyway, here's this product, and it's called Pet Track. And what I'm going to do is turn the camera around there so you can see it on this side. There you go. PetTrack.com, GPS cat tracking. And we've been really happy with this because, frankly, it's been quite reliable. So we're believers in making life good. And let's face it, we can be protective of our pets like helicopter parents, but any of us who leaves home pretty much is someone who drives a car, and statistically is the most dangerous thing any of us does. But we do it because getting around and going to work and doing social things with other people, well, that's part of a full life. And a full life of these cats, in some cases, means that they absolutely have to do what they have to do. So, yeah, they're predators we keep as pets, and we accept that about them because we love them and they're pretty important to us. So I hope this was helpful to you, and I invite you to visit my website, drjeffnicol.com, D-R-J-E-F-F, last name Nichol.com. If you subscribe, which of course is no charge, every Tuesday morning, you'll get my Facebook Lives. I occasionally do other videos. I'll put a blog on there. And also every single week is my column from the previous week from the Albuquerque Journal. And I answer questions about behavior and physical problems of cats and dogs. I try to split it 50-50. And of course, I welcome you to go to my Facebook page anytime you want and ask a question about your pets. Or just comment on something like this, because if there's a subject that you'd like me to cover in a future Facebook Live, I'd be happy to do it. So any other comments, by all means. And thanks so much for tuning in. And Tony and Gaston and Miss America here, who's upside down in my lap, we all say thank you for coming. Have a great evening.